Welcome, everyone, to the White Rabbit Podcast. It's good to have you with us. My name is Matt Kraus, coming to you from Bonderma, Turkey. And usually my co-host, Alpa Rosanes, would be joining me. He's in Barcelona, Spain. Usually he would be joining me, but he couldn't be here today. He's on the road traveling. So it's just me and our guest, Brad Farris. So, Brad, say a quick hi to our audience, and then I will read some more intro stuff.
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad that you invited me, Matt.
Well, and Brad is a repeat guest on our podcast. He's one of our all-time favorite guests. We have him on every 9.6 months. And yes, I did calculate that 9.6. Alper and I have been doing this podcast for a little over 4 years now, and this is Brad's 5th appearance, which comes out to once every 9.6 months. So welcome back, Brad. It's a pleasure to
Thanks.
have you with us, as
It's
always.
great to be here. I always have a good time with you guys.
So, as many of you know from previous episodes, Brad heads up a company in Chicago called Anchor Advisors. And there he does executive coaching and leadership development. And he also puts out a regular newsletter, of which I am a big fan. And Brad, most of our listeners know who you are since we've had you on here many
Yeah,
times.
sure.
But there'll be some new listeners who are wondering, who is this Brad guy? So help me out here with this intro. What else should these new listeners know about you?
Well, I'm a longtime Chicago guy. I have 5 kids. My oldest is 32. My youngest is 17. Um, and I geek out about leadership and about helping uh, owners and leaders of smaller firms to grow and to develop into the leader that allows their business to grow. Uh, I've been particularly working this year with CEOs and their management teams. So where I'm doing coaching with the CEO and then doing some cohorts with the management team to try to really level up the leadership of the whole enterprise, which that's been a blast.
And Brad, you mentioned the phrase geek out. And I second that because that's one of the things that I love about that newsletter that you send out is when you send out that newsletter, I read it immediately when I get it because I'm like, okay, Brad is clearly very interested in this topic. Like not only like he's not just writing this because, some business guru somewhere told him that he should. He's writing this because he really loves the topic. So I second that. And
And if you want to get on the list, listener, you can go to anchoradvisors.com/conversations and you
yes, I
can
would
get the list
highly
right there.
recommend that. What was that, Brad? Anchor Advisors.
Anchoradvisors.com/conversations.
Yeah, I would highly recommend signing up for that one. Okay, one more thing before we get started, Brad. If our listeners want to get in touch with you after the
Sure.
podcast, where can they find you?
Anchor Advisors is the best place to go. Anchoradvisors.com.
Okay,
I'm also on LinkedIn under Brad Farris. You can find me there, but those are the 2 places where most people connect.
okay. And on to the main topic for today, and that's
Yeah,
the newsletter that I mentioned.
indeed.
A recent edition of that newsletter, and I love this title. A recent edition of that newsletter was called "Seriously Have Some Fun." Seriously have some fun, and it was all about an article in the Journal of Applied Psychology that Brad read, and the article was. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Brad, but the article was about how humor improves your leadership. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And before we get started with my questions for Brad, I wanted to point out 2 things that Brad mentioned in that newsletter. One is that Brad said that leaders who use humor are perceived as more competent. And I want to circle back to that later in the
Yep.
podcast, Brad,
Yep.
because that was very interesting. That phrase caught my eye in particular because in the presentation training world, we often hear people say that if I make a joke, people aren't going to take me seriously. So that's one of the
Interesting.
main pieces of pushback that we get on
Mhm.
that. And another thing that I wanted to point out is that Brad mentioned humor signals safety.
Yes.
So I don't know, Brad. Maybe let's start there,
Sure.
and because I'm thinking, what does that mean in the context of presentations? I read that and thought, okay, well, I think I know what you mean, Brad, but tell me more. So, do you mean that people are going to feel safe if I laugh at myself? What do you mean by that?
So there's one thing that both presentations and leadership have in common, and that's that there's a status gap or a power differential, right?
Oh,
The
uh-huh.
leader has a higher status, the speaker has a higher status, and so there's an implied power gap between the listener and the speaker in that situation. And
Okay.
so so one of the ways that we can reduce that power gap is to use a little humor. And in particular, as you're mentioned, if I'm willing to laugh at myself, then it kind of humanizes me. It says I'm not separate and distinct and different from you, the listener, but that we're kind of more on the same level. And while many speakers want to have that status differential and use that status differential, what I would say is it's there anyway. Whether we use humor to reduce it, people are still going to see us at that higher status. But by using some humor, it just humanizes it, makes it easier for people to feel like they can hear what we have to say and stay on the same level.
Okay. So, let's put that translate in that into a presentation situation.
Yeah,
So, okay, so in a let's say back up a second to like a, department leadership situation.
sure.
If I'm the boss of the department, then I can totally see how using humor while I'm speaking, it's going to help my people in my department relax. But now in a presentation, often I don't personally, I don't agree with this way of seeing things, but often, uh, the perception is that I am the speaker, I am the supplicant, and let's say the audience, I don't know, they're like
Yeah.
the CEO or the board or something,
Hmm.
so the perceived power gap goes in the opposite direction.
I
The person
see.
up there
Sure.
speaking is not the most powerful one, and
Yes.
the person in the audience knows what's going on. So is humor gonna help in a situation like that too?
Well, let's look at what humor does biochemically.
Okay.
When we laugh, the cortisol in our brain gets reduced. Cortisol is the stress hormone, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's naturally helping us to relax. So if we're nervous because we're speaking to a group of, the board or people that are intimidating to us, using a little humor will help us to lower that stress level and be a little
Mm.
more free.
Oh, okay. Sure, sure.
The other thing that laughing does is it produces endorphins. It's just like a runner's high or the feeling that we get when we're in love. That oxytocin and endorphins start to pump through our system, and so we feel better about ourselves. And earlier when you were talking about how is this going to make me look,
Mhm.
anytime that I'm starting to worry about how I look, my focus where I want my focus to be is on the audience, right?
Yeah.
So when I'm
Yeah.
thinking about how do I look, how am I being perceived, then I'm not focusing on the audience. I'm not paying attention to are my words landing? Are people getting the thing that I'm sending across? And so humor helps me just to let some of that go, to be a little less wound up and to that helps me to connect better just from my own side. What's going on? Am I perceiving what the audience is doing? How are they reacting? Rather than focusing on how do I look? How am I being perceived?
Yeah, and I can also see how okay, so not only because what you're describing is that the speaker up there kinda laughing and not taking things so seriously helps the speaker get out of the speaker's head, which
Yes.
is a huge, huge benefit,
Yes.
in a presentation. Another Another way that this could be used in a presentation setting. So, like if the perceived power dynamic is going the opposite way,
Yeah.
let's say that your audience is the CEO or the board or whatever.
Right.
Um, so if they are also laughing along with you, which hopefully they hopefully, hopefully they are laughing along with you and not just laughing at you.
Yes, exactly. We don't. That's a whole different category.
Yeah. The thing that you mentioned, if they are laughing along with you, that laughter is also going to be reducing their cortisol
That's
levels.
exactly right.
They will perceive you as, hey, I like this person because this person reduces my cortisol levels. Whew, I
And
like it.
let's think about what that does for our message.
Uh-huh.
Are they more likely to hear and absorb the thing that we're putting out if their
Uh-huh.
cortisol levels are low? Or, because when their cortisol levels are high, you get a lot of this kind of,
Yeah, yeah. Defensiveness.
standoffishness. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So humor
Another,
works both ways there. It helps you to get out of your head, which, as you point
uh,
out, is a huge problem for speakers. And
yeah.
it helps lower the defensiveness of the audience so that they're more likely to hear what we have to say.
And that point about getting out of your head. A couple episodes back, do you remember that episode where uh, I kind of put myself up as a guinea pig and
Yeah.
I had a presentation that went disastrously, and you
Yes.
helped me
The bomb of
troubleshoot?
all bombs.
Yeah, it was like a horrible bomb. I still like that was 5 or 6 years ago, and I still have nightmares about that. Anyway, so one of the problems that that I experience is exactly what you're describing here is because I personally have that moment at the beginning of the presentation where I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, am I going to do this presentation from inside my head or am I going to get outside of my head? And I know from experience that if I begin the presentation and I'm inside my head, then it's just going to go downhill from there. But if I can whip out this laughter thing, then I can reverse that downward spiral. And instead of things just getting worse and worse and worse and worse, as Matt goes further and further into his head, the laughter is going to reverse the cycle and get me out of my head.
That's right.
And so, another thing that you mentioned, I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned in that newsletter, you said leaders who use humor are perceived as more competent.
That's
And,
right.
and, and like I said, we get a lot of pushback on that. People saying, oh, there's no room for humor in the business world. And if people see me making a joke, they're going to think that I'm stupid or they're not going to take me seriously if I
Yeah.
make a joke. So
Yeah.
when you say this phrase, leaders who use humor are perceived as more competent, what did you mean by that?
So there are two references that got me started down this path. One is a classic book by John Cotter called The General Managers, in which he followed around a
Okay.
group of general managers just to see what they did all day and how they
Uh,
got their job done.
okay.
And one of the things that he calls out in that book is that the most effective general managers use a lot of humor.
Huh?
That they're constantly kind of joking with people, and it's really, for the general manager, it's about lightening the mood. When the boss shows up, there can be kind of a heaviness or uh, an oppressive character that's kind of floating around with you. And
Mhm.
if you want people to be honest with you and you want to find out what's really happening, and if you want, again, for them to listen to what you have to say, reducing the stress level or the ominousness is important. And humor is one way that people have done that. Um, second, the second one is an HBR article, and I can
Mhm.
send you a link so you can put it in the show notes. But it had a study that showed from performance reviews that people who used more humor had higher performance reviews. Even 18 months after they left, people would still rate them higher than other managers who didn't use humor in their conversation.
Wait. Say that again. Even 18 months later, huh?
Yes.
So the person has been gone for a year and a half,
Yes.
and people are still having fond memories of that person. Is
That's
that what you're
correct.
saying?
That's
Wow.
correct. Yeah. And
Huh.
rating them higher than other managers who didn't use humor.
Interesting.
And so the again, I think part of this is just about reducing people's stress level when you're having, you know, as the boss, you're having difficult conversations sometimes. You're holding people accountable. You're kind of pushing them in a certain direction, might be leading them in a direction they're not comfortable with, asking them to change. And so a consideration around that is to use some humor to lighten the mood and to get a little bit more honest feedback from people.
And let me ask you about this,
Yeah.
the execution of this. Is it's nice to say, "Hey, inject some humor and things are gonna go better for you." So it's there's that theory, but then, okay, so in the implementation, then I'm still not sure how to do it. Like, should I begin my presentation with a joke? Like there are, two rabbis and a cowboy walk into a bar or something like that. Uh, how do I do this?
So it's interesting. One of the things to be aware of, especially in the year of our Lord 2026, is that different people see humor differently, right?
Uh,
And so you never want to be in a position where you're punching down,
okay,
where you're kind of making fun of someone um, who already has a lower status than you do.
okay.
And so the safest and I think sometimes most effective thing to do is to make fun of yourself a little bit. Um,
Ah,
the CEO that I learned the most from, his name was Bob Baker.
okay,
Uh, we were flying to Texas. We had bought a company. It was the acquisition closed the night before. We flew down to talk to the team. And so it was he and I was going to be the general manager of this organization going forward. And so this is a stressful time. Management has changed. The first thing he did was tell a fairly lengthy story about a time that he was driving a barge and bumped into the pier and knocked the governor, lieutenant governor, and all of the reporters that were covering this event into the lake.
okay.
And so he started with this very self-deprecating story about a time when he was essentially an idiot, 30 years ago. Um, but it really set a tone where, we could have a real conversation now. And so I think it can be really helpful at the beginning of a presentation to tell a personal story that maybe has some humor related to it. I'll tell you another example. I was at a conference where I was giving a keynote talk last year, and the guy before me got up, and this was in October, and he got up and he talked about how his family really gets into Halloween. And he showed like 10 years of Halloween costumes of he and his family. And they
Uh-huh,
do theme, like the whole family dresses in a theme costume for Halloween. And they
uh-huh,
were ridiculous. Like they were
uh-huh,
really crazy. And
uh-huh.
like who has 10 years of family Halloween pictures that they can just whip out for a presentation? But it was very effective. Like I was really engaged in the rest of that conversation because this was a real person who's shown us something that was a little bit vulnerable.
And if from the sounds of what you're saying is that people are not needing to dig deep to find these stories. It's
Right.
not like some profound thing. It's like,
Right.
if you have any social skills at all, like if you have a beer with a friend at a bar, you
Yes.
probably have way more humor skills. So you don't need to think, oh, well, I can't use humor at all because I'm not, Eddie Murphy or
Yeah.
whoever the big
Thank goodness if
humor.
you're not Eddie Murphy like that, you get in a lot of trouble with Eddie Murphy stuff.
So so you don't need to be like some big professional comedian be to use humor to relax people. If you have enough social skills to, hang out at a bar and drink a beer with a friend, that's all you need. So you don't need to have the best joke in the whole world.
No.
Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, this HBR article actually talks about having a signature story, kind of a story that you can like, and the dumping the governor and lieutenant governor. Like, I had heard Bob tell that story dozens of times. It was still funny. It's
Uh,
funny every time I heard it.
uh,
So you can have like a couple of standbys that you kind of pull out.
uh,
But yes, it's like you said, it's the story you tell at the bar. It's the story that your family tells at Thanksgiving. Remember
uh,
that time that dad, whatever, right?
uh,
Those
uh,
are the stories, and they're funny. They're
yeah,
great. And
yeah,
they relax everybody. Everybody's guard comes down, and then you can get into whatever presentation you want to get into from a
uh,
place of humility and grace and more collegiality as opposed to some sort of up down kind of position.
yeah. And another good point that you made there is that repetition is
Yes.
okay. Like there is no problem with repetition. You don't
Yeah.
need to feel the pressure of, oh, I've got to have something original every time. It's perfectly acceptable to break out stories multiple times. And another interesting comment that you made there, Brad, is that you said that even though this was not the first time that you heard this story about him pushing people into the water off the barge, and the governor and stuff, this was not the first time, and you still thought it was funny. So
It was
even
hilarious.
yeah, so it's not like you need to be flying to a completely different city to use the story again. It's okay if you use it again with the
Yeah.
same people. They'll still think it's funny,
Yeah.
even multiple times. Like, back to Eddie Murphy. Who would have thought at the beginning of this podcast that we were going to spend so much time so much time talking about Eddie Murphy? But Eddie Murphy, it's been a long time since I've listened to Eddie Murphy. It's probably been, it's been decades, but I used to listen to his tapes multiple times over, and I would think that they were funny all the time. Or every time. And so you don't need to, be flying to some different city and to break out the story. If you've told the story before, it's okay to tell it again.
And, every time you tell it, it's going to have a slightly different spin to it. Or, if you
Uh,
look at the situation that you're in, you're emphasizing different parts of the story, that's fine. Tell an abbreviated version of the story or a longer version of the story. Like, there are lots of different ways that you can create some variation around it that match the situation that you're in.
yeah. So we're going to, Brad, we're going to need to wrap up the podcast in a moment here. So before we go, before I wrap things up, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about this?
This would be a great time for me to tell a joke, but I don't have one that comes to mind. But that's the point. Like, there it is. I don't have a
oh,
joke, but I
ju-
made a funny comment there.
yeah,
That
yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to point out that even though Brad did not have a joke, I still laughed.
exactly, exactly.
And I'm still laughing. I'm still laughing at the fact that Brad did not have a joke. Okay, so back to serious for a second, Brad. So before we go, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I mean, getting back to where you started, Matt, that don't be afraid to use some humor, and don't be afraid to make a little fun of yourself. That um, people's opinion of you goes up. You're able to make a joke about yourself. It actually demonstrates that you have confidence and that you're secure in who you are. And that's something that people tend to admire and
Mm,
appreciate. And so
yeah, good point.
any kind of self-consciousness about that, both the data where bears that out, and as you point out, Matt, that self-consciousness isn't helping you anyway. So tell the joke and get over yourself.
That's a great place to end it. Tell the joke, and what did you say? Tell the joke and get over yourself. Is that what you
Yes.
said? That's great. Tell the joke and get over yourself. I think that's like 10 years of presentation training right there. Okay, so thank you, Brad, for joining us again, and it's always a pleasure to have you back.
I'll see you in March.
In 9.6 months.
Exactly.
All right, thanks a lot. Take
All right.
care.
Talk to you later, Matt.
Bye bye.